Welcome to the Nage Arch One podcast. My name is Isaac Kamens. This is a bi-weekly podcast where my friend Jess O'Brien and I discuss internal martial arts, qigong, and meditation. In this episode, we conclude our discussion of Master Sudong Chen and his training with Chang Sheng, the famous Suijiao master, as well as his final teacher, Master He. And in our Patreon this week, we begin a series of articles on Master Zhang Zhengfeng, the Grandmaster of the Yizhong school. So this week we'll be looking at one by Lodishu about his Grandmaster Zhang Zhengfeng, which covers the beginning of the Yizhong as well as Master Zhang's arrival in Taiwan. He talks a bit about the Hung brothers and their different personalities and different styles. So check it out. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Thanks for listening. Thanks for all your support, and be well.
All right, today we're going to conclude our episode on the story of the life of Master Sudong Chen. So we're drawing this from Martial Cultivation Journal, which you can find online, published by Alex Cosma. Lineofintent.com is the publisher. Going back to the story of Sudong Chen's life, he says, "At the age of 15, I studied martial arts for only 1 year, but I was tricked by my senior brother into participating in a competition. I ended up getting second place. Then at the age of 20, my father sent me off to Japan to become independent. I relied on myself for a living and relied on my fist for martial arts. Japan has its own martial arts, Budo, disregarding the so-called ancestors of China and whatever martial arts sects and styles, and the forms and routines of those traditional boxing systems. So, however, he says, the Tang Shudao Martial Arts School is located in Lion Hall Alley, next to the Yonglei Elementary School, on Anxi Street in Taipei. In this area, back in the old days, there are many street gangs, martial arts schools, and gang members, such as workers, thieves, drug addicts, gambling houses, brothels, and illegal prostitution houses, where all sorts of people gather, including gangsters and criminals. There was no shortage of fights, murders, and other violent incidents. Back in that era, when firearms were not common, the bosses of the underworld would have to have some martial arts skills. Of course, there were also many brothers in the Tang Shudao martial arts dojo who were involved in the underworld." So that's where he got started on this sort of street fighting mentality out in Lion Hall Alley in Taipei. It sounds pretty rough. And the book Blurred Boundaries does describe the scene out there as being not, it doesn't talk about prostitution and drugs as much, but he definitely portrays the general vibe of gang violence and underworld activity going on. Yeah, that it was somewhat intimidating to go down there to learn martial arts because it was a bit scary if you were gonna
for any reason.
Yeah. So Sue says, after practicing from Monday to Saturday from 7 to 10 p.m. every night, we would drink tea and listen to stories. Often there would be some gang leaders or senior martial arts brothers who would talk about their experience of fighting and killing, which would ignite our passion for martial arts. In addition, we would occasionally witness or encounter real fights and killings on the street, which gave us a strong sense of imminent danger of violence. Even though I had won first or second place in fighting tournaments when I was 16 and 17 years old, I was still very afraid of street fights and brawls. The more afraid I was, the more I cared. And for a while, I was avoiding and deceiving myself. However, you can't hide forever. In the end, I made up my mind to overcome this unnecessary fear which was holding me back. What should I do to overcome the fear, though? Lion Hall Lane, hooligans, gangsters, big brothers, there's just too many of them. After observing, I found that the level of people who are imprisoned for murder is different from those who are not imprisoned. So basically, the guys who get away with it have a different level. You have to, the more savvy ones are getting away with it, basically. So you have to know the street mentality really well.
Yeah, if you know, yeah, exactly. If you're street smart, you're not going to end up getting caught. Yeah.
So he's 17 years old. So he says, the senior brother I chose to follow was Toyo, known as Lumbar Eel. I repeatedly requested and was finally able to follow him. Observe and learn from the affairs of others around you and experience the underworld. From being a vanguard to being a bodyguard, Accumulating experiences like group fights with weapons, gradually fear becomes stimulating and pain becomes a source of pleasure. So it sounds like his mentor Toyo isn't such a bad guy though. He says, um, senior brother Toyo doesn't allow me to attack a lone person or carry and use weapons. And I asked him why. He said, why would someone who fights in the ring attack a single person? That's bullying the weak. Yes, but everyone else carries weapons, so shouldn't I be prepared too? But none of these other guys practice martial arts. Damn, what's the point of practicing martial arts if you have to carry a knife? Um, so it sounds like he kind of doubts this advice, though, a little bit of like, I don't know. He
Yeah.
says, because that's not a very realistic view of martial arts. And maybe for an outsider at the time, especially in the 70s, karate or whatever was seen as invincible, right? Like you could disarm a gun or whatever, but
Mm,
yeah, that
not without
isn't
a lot of practice and luck.
right. That invulnerability is bubble has been popped, luckily by now. But at the time, maybe people were still thinking that was an option. So I did this because my older brother said it, but it wasn't until I was stabbed by a knife once that I realized the horror of it. So I dedicated myself to studying various ways to deal with long and short knives. Afterward, I encountered several situations where I had to fight against knives with my bare hands, and I managed to come out unscathed. Once in high school, we were attacked by 8 or 9 people with knives, but I fought back with a wooden stick and protected my classmates, both male and female. I learned a lot from the courage, training, and pressure I received from my senior Toyo. The restrictions of not being allowed to carry weapons led me to study tactics and techniques for dealing with weapon attacks. The restrictions of fighting someone alone also gave me the lessons of fighting alone against many, which later allowed me to experience the excitement and thrill of fighting against 10 to 60 people.
60?
So it's interesting. He said because he was forbidden to carry a weapon, he had to learn to fight bare hand against weapon. And because he wasn't allowed to, attack single people, he had to learn how to fight by himself against groups.
Mm-hmm.
Which, if you survive, those are probably great lessons. But
That make you tough as hell. That's for sure.
unfortunately, that type of training has a way of removing you from the gene pool. So, he must have been incredibly talented and, somewhat lucky to have survived those
Yeah,
lessons.
and training for fighting multiple people is a whole different thing, you know. It's like that requires a lot of cooperative stuff at first, but
Mm,
then a lot of stuff where you put yourself in situations where you're probably going to lose a lot
right,
because it takes just a lot of practice, and
right.
it's not an easy thing to just
No. Yeah, I mean Bagua is built in the way the stepping is designed and the move arm movements are designed to help you deal with multiple people, but it's never going to be easy, right? Like
no.
that's always the hardest thing to do, and no martial art's going to make you automatically good at that.
But if you train against multiple people, then when you're faced with one, it's not nearly as
Right.
uh,
Right. I mean, and that would be the way to train. It sounds like he just got thrown in the deep end of the pool, though. Like
yeah,
survive
he
or
didn't have a
die. That's
choice.
the other way to learn. Is
That's
like,
not that
oh, the
was
option is death. Okay,
sink or
well,
swim kind of, yeah.
yeah. So that's not recommended, I think. But he did, like he said, like that the pain becomes pleasure and the stress becomes excitement. Like if you can survive in
Yeah,
that environment, you can adapt to it and it becomes a thrilling experience, like
I think
that's kind of frightening.
you have to want to do it. I mean,
That's not for everybody.
yeah, that's
As
but
a matter of fact, that's almost for nearly nobody. You have to be a little off your rocker, basically.
yeah, it
And
becomes
hey,
an obsession at that point. I think
right,
it's no longer a hobby.
right. This is your thing. And there's always those guys that out there who need to have it. That excitement, that thrill, that intensity is just their nervous system requires that. So,
Well, yeah,
I
and
feel fortunate that mine doesn't because I've had a very
uh,
relaxed, easy life.
well, and there's like a lot of people have um things that they're trying to overcome from early life. And one of the ways to do that is to become the best at something, right? Like,
Mm,
one of
sure.
the ways to prove to yourself that you aren't worthless in the eyes of the world is, to do something and become well known at it, right?
Right.
So I think if you're lacking approval as a youngster, right, one of the things you look for as an
Mm,
adult is more approval. And, like guys like us who didn't have a lack
right.
of approval as kids, we're like, who cares?
I'm not as much to prove, basically.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
ain't got nothing to lose, nothing to prove, like
Right.
it's just like, but I think if you're really invested in that, that title or whatever, or that pursuit of greatness, right? Like
Right.
that's a whole different thing.
And that's how legends like Sudong Chen are made. They're not everyday people.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fine with mediocrity as far as that
Right.
goes, I don't.
Exactly.
Because I, his point about, the Chinese martial arts just being names in the past, I do think that's like very valid. That a
Yeah.
lot of people will just kind of they'll rattle off some names and from their lineage if as if that's supposed to prove their
Right.
level of skill. And what matters if you is if you actually absorb the skill, because you can have a great, your teacher could be a
Yeah.
great fighter
Of
and you could
course.
never learn to fight.
Right.
You could have a teacher that's not that great of a fighter and you can go off and become an amazing fighter. Like there's a lot of I think it's boxing coaches I think are a good example of
Sure.
it,
Yeah.
right?
We've used that example so much.
That
Yeah.
that like Mike Tyson would not be Mike Tyson without his coaches, but he could have kicked the living shit out of any of his coaches at 15. What they did was take it and refine it. And I think
Right.
that's the piece about where, the if you're really looking for um the highest level of your own personal development or whatever, you're not going to limit yourself to just people who can, beat you in a sense. That
Right.
you're
They
going to
can offer
also
you something.
look
Yeah.
for things that might just benefit you in other ways too.
Well, ironically, that's the next thing that he talks about is his encounter with Master Chang, the
Mm.
Chinese martial
Shuizhou guy,
master of
yeah,
Chinese wrestling. Um,
who we've talked about before.
yeah, so he's come up on the
He's come up quite a
Patreon
bit.
and when BK Francis had a match or a challenge sort of situation with him that um, we detailed on the Patreon. But yeah, so Sudong Chen's experience meeting this older master, ironically, he's always putting down this whole teacher worship kind of thing, and it's not about your lineage and so on. And yet, meeting up with this senior old school guy who is like, in his probably late 70s or older, was a huge turning point in his martial arts experience, similar to that experience in Japan when he saw this whole new way of doing things. So he says, in 1983, I visited the Wrestling King in San Francisco, USA.
Hmm.
I sought guidance from Master Chang Sheng in the Xing Yi Lianhuan, and I was deeply ashamed when Master Chang asked me, "Where's the linking in your fist?" So the linking Xing Yi linking fist is one of the forms. So
Right.
Master Chang says, "Where's the linking in your fist?" It was no longer a matter of whether my boxing skills were good or not, but a question of principle. After several years of contemplation and practice, I finally understood the essence of linking. Later, when I asked about the throwing techniques of Bagwajang, I angered Master Chang and was almost attacked twice. It was worth it to have the opportunity to experiment with Bagwajang's throwing techniques in front of Master Chang, even if I got beaten up. So it sounds like he used a traditional method of asking a stupid question in front of the teacher in order to get the
Right.
teacher to violently demonstrate it on you, and thereby giving you the chance to steal that art a little
Yeah,
bit.
that's a Jess move.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's well known in Chinese martial arts that you sort of play the fool and say, well, geez, I wonder if that would really work and if someone tried it. And then, of course, the
Well,
teacher
I,
gets
I
steamed up and comes rushing over to
do you
slam you.
think it's because he was like sort of trying to say that those techniques were from Bagua
Uh,
and Chang Sheng is getting annoyed, being like, no, no, that's
that's
Sui
Shui
Jiao.
Jiao, mofo. Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
So, so I walked the linking fist, and Master Chang also walked the linking fist. I walked the Bagojang, and Master Chang also walked the Bagojang. What teacher would demonstrate fist form movements to a young stranger? That's incredibly rare, and most people are much worse compared to him. He's truly admirable. So he's saying that Master Chang demonstrated for him when he demonstrated, and they
Right.
like treated him with respect, even as a young guy, which is rare in Chinese martial arts, right? Like the master hardly ever demonstrates his forms. Like that's a known thing that your teacher would show you the forms. Like when I was learning Southern Shaolin, our teacher, Sifu Paul Gale, would never show us a form. He'd show one move, and then you'd follow a senior student through the form. But I never saw him do a form from start to finish in my entire experience with him, in my entire life. Like just that's just not done. And I think his teacher was the same
Well,
way.
I mean, that's one of the reasons I think I was so lucky with Bruce is that during the time that I was training with him, he was more than willing to do it with us, if not on us. But like
Off and on us.
yeah, it was like, I mean, I just recently found some pictures of like a weekly class where, we're all doing the form and he's, up there in the front of the class and
Leading the form, yeah.
leading the form. And I think there's something about, getting, especially with, I mean, someone you just met, if they're
Right.
willing to just kind of mix it up with you like that, that's pretty, it's very kind in a sense. And I think there's a piece like what you were saying about, the Chang being kind of the old guy that he like reveres or whatever. I think part of that is Chang was he was an innovator too.
Mm.
He wasn't a I just do one style guy, right?
Mm-mm.
He did Tai Chi, he did
Sheng
Bagua,
Yi, yeah.
So he had
And he
he
created his own Sheng Yi
his own
system and
Xingyi, his
form.
own Tai
Yeah.
Chi style. I mean, they were,
Right.
pretty similar to the ones he learned, but
Right.
he put his own spin on it. And I think that's
Mm.
what Sue did. So I think in a
Yeah.
sense that, he may have been the like inspiration to kind of
Yeah.
um this piece about, being able to innovate something, evolve, grow, change it, do a lot of stuff with it, and yet still basically keep the essence of what it was when you learned it in the traditional way, right?
So he says in 1986, I returned to Taiwan by order of teacher Chang Dongsheng. 3 years previously, we had a brief encounter in San Francisco, and I am grateful that teacher Chang still remembered me. However, I still don't know why he asked me to come back to Taiwan. After exchanging greetings, he inquired about my experience in martial arts competitions, and I reported the results of the unarmed martial arts tournaments in Taiwan, as well as comparison matches with Japanese martial arts and Thai boxing.
Hmm.
Teacher Chang asked, how do you deal with karate? I answered, karate emphasizes speed, so intercept their steps. Teacher Chang then asked, how do you deal with Muay Thai? I said, I use both hands to counter one hand. Then Teacher Chang asked, since you can strike, why do you need to do wrestling? I answered, in striking and kicking are outsiders, but in close combat, tripping and throwing are very difficult to defend. Teacher Chang asked, do you know push hands and free sparring? I replied, I have learned them, and he said, let's compare. I demonstrated several moves in pushing hands and free sparring. He asked, why are your body and legs moving chaotically? I replied, it might be because of training well. It should be the coordination of the 3 joints of the legs and body. Teacher Chang said he would show me some fist techniques and asked me to watch quietly. Teacher Chang first demonstrated the basic skill of single hook grip from Suijiao, which is very gentle, sticky, and coiling movements. I tried to memorize his movements. Teacher Chang glared at me and said, be quiet, no talking aloud. Then he performed linking fists from Xing. I murmured words and tried to remember the movements, but Teacher Chang glared at me again and said, didn't I tell you not to talk? Don't you understand? After that, Teacher Chang shouted loudly, shut up! Why are you muttering in your mouth? If you keep doing this, I won't continue. You're just memorizing the names of the movement. What's the point? That's foolish. I no longer dared to recite the names of the movements and instead focused on memorizing his brief demonstrations of Shuai Jiao, Xing Yitren, Baguozhang, Taijitren. And after returning to Japan, I pondered for over half a year, thinking, why did Master Chang forbid me from reciting the names of the movements? Without the names of the movements, how could I differentiate between different types of martial arts? What does that seamless flow like water movement that Master Chang demonstrated try to express? So it sounds like, yeah, Master Chang was like the names don't matter. That has nothing to do with it. You've got to flow like water seamlessly. That's what that linking he was talking about. The linking form is about connecting seamlessly from one move to the next without any break, and that's those are the type of questions that Chinese martial arts asks you to ponder because it's beyond just memorizing the names of the forms and following them. You gotta eat them and transform
Yeah,
them and
it
absorb them somehow.
sounds like he was sort of, as he was doing it, he was like kind of going, oh, that's this move, and that, oh, that's
Hmm.
this move. Like he's trying to memorize, like, okay, what he was doing or
And
something.
maybe also show out that he knew what he was doing. So,
Right.
Bung
He's like,
Chuan, Pao
shut up.
Chuan. So,
Yeah.
shut up.
Right, right. This is very, yeah, I mean, I think Chang was a bit gruff.
Yeah, it sounds like the gruff type. So he said he went back to Japan and he just kept thinking and thinking and tried to understand what he was talking about. And he said, I looked up the words linking continuously, water, and flow in the dictionary. I found the term fluid dynamics. Suddenly I got goosebumps, and further research on wave dynamics, ergonomics, applied mechanics made my head numb. Oh my God, what are all these mechanics? It was quite challenging to search for information without a computer back then. I visited the bookstore countless times. So he found a comic book version of Einstein um, that sort of explained it in simplistic
Right,
form. So
right,
he
right.
he studied as much as he could and began to start to understand physics. He said it broke the superstition and blind obedience, opening the way for thinking and exploration. I'm truly grateful to Teacher Chang for repeatedly prohibiting my foolish act of memorizing the names of movements. So that he says that he credits that with giving him the opportunity to start, using scientific principles. Um, he says in a sect or a cult, there's a lack of principles. You all just listen to what the founder says. No matter what they say or hear, they will believe it. Martial arts sects are just the entrance to martial arts. Any specific fist style is the lowest line of martial arts, not the goal. Styles are just fragments of combat. Combat sports fighting skills are the minimum limit of combat, not the maximum. The definition of martial arts cannot be determined by a single sect which rules its own world without the others, as each sect has its own understanding of martial arts. Styles that are restricted by rules naturally cannot have principles for combat. Once you have principles, styles no longer exist. What kind of martial arts is X Chuan if it doesn't have a definition of what martial arts really are? Whereas combat sports styles without principles is only a combat sport technique, not martial arts combat. Obedience is the duty of a soldier, while servility is the habit of a servant, and superstition and blind obedience is the destiny of a sect. Those who obey, nod, and blindly follow are soldiers, servants, and sect members. That's the lowest line. So yeah, he's again that he's driven by finding the principles and essence of all these martial arts rather than just following along what everybody says.
Yeah, it's good advice, I think. I mean, the traditional martial arts are a good place to start because you'll learn forms, you'll learn body mechanics and all that stuff, which is an important part of fighting. But at some point, if you want to learn to fight, you got to go into things that aren't rehearsed or set patterns and stuff and just do that. There aren't a lot of places you can go where you can fight somebody with no rules, right? Like, I mean,
Mm.
other than on the street.
So Sudong Chen describes how sort of kind of his final phase of learning Chinese martial arts was from three masters from the old Central Guoshu Institute. Now that's something we've discussed a lot. That was sort of this turning point in the 1920s in China when the government established official schools for spreading Chinese martial arts in an official way. And some great teachers taught there, and the guys who came out of there in the 1930s and 40s and ended up spreading Chinese martial arts all over the place, sort of creating what modern wushu, stuff like that. Like that was the roots of a lot of what goes on today. He said, and a couple of these guys made a really strong impact on him. Master Chang Sheng, the wrestling master, learned at the Guoshu Institute as well. So he says that in 1988, Sudong Chen invited teacher He Fu Sheng to Tokyo, Japan, to become a formal apprentice and learn martial arts, including Xingyi, Baguazhang, and Taiji. Teacher He personally left a recognition letter as proof. So, Teacher He was from the Central Guoshu Institute, established in Nanjing in 1928 by the nationalist government of the Republic of China, and it was the first martial arts educational institution organized in Chinese history. So, Master He was the grandson of a great master of Chen. And so he had a strong martial arts background. He says, in 1928, Master He achieved excellence in the first national martial arts examination in Nanjing. So that's the 1928 tournament that is very well known in the martial arts world as sort of the biggest and greatest martial arts competition ever, where everybody was fighting to, the bitter end, and it had to be stopped due to the number of injuries and so on. And so a lot of different Chinese martial arts school had one of their teachers participated in that. And so Master He Fuxing was also part of that. In 1929, he was admitted to the third phase of the Nanjing National Martial Arts Institute as a student in the professor class. During the same period, he was classmates with the wrestling king, Chang Sheng, and the chief martial arts instructor of the Central Guard Bureau, Jiang Haochen. So anyways, those are some of the classmates of Master He. He was the class leader in his professor class and graduated as the top student with outstanding achievements. His precise and commanding boxing movements set an example for everyone. So he doesn't tell us a whole lot more about Master He Fuxing, but you can look on YouTube and see some of his demonstrations. And he's definitely heavily, Xingyi is one of the things he demonstrates, and you can see his style. And you were commenting on it reminded you more of how Sudong Chen demonstrates rather than his first teacher, Hong Yixiang. And that Master He seemed to have a great influence on
Yeah, I
Sudong Chen's
mean,
style.
just from a quick glance, it looks like what Sudong Shin was doing was kind of taking, Hung Yishang's forms, but putting this guy's and other people's methods into those forms, right? So if you look at Sudong Sheng's forms, for example, they're real similar to Hung Yishang's, but they're not done for the way, for example, like Lotus Shu would do them or somebody. They're done with this kind of, a little bit different stylistic flavor to
You
it.
can see the way he holds his body very erect, and the way he follows his movements to sort of maximize, like he really stretches super far out. Whereas I don't know, it's hard to describe, but he has a different flavor of his movements, basically.
You can see it when you watch people do things. They take on, some people are sort of more round and roly-poly and smooth, and other people are kind of sharp and snappy and whippy.
Angular, yeah.
And his is very, comparatively kind of snappy compared to a lot of Hung Yishang's other people, I think.
Right, yeah, everybody, the different teachers you have influence it. Oftentimes your base teacher is the one that you forms the basis of your actions, but then all the ones you meet influence it and change that as time goes on. So he ends the article this way and says, here's some advice from Sudong Chen as we wrap up here. Take the initiative to visit great teachers by yourself to consult, instead of waiting for the teacher to invite and persuade you. Those who are self-satisfied are arrogant, and those who have a narrow outlook cannot be humble in seeking advice. Visits should be respectful, and inquiries should have a specific topic. Don't visit with empty hands, and don't ask questions without using your head. It's common sense to pay for meals. Your conduct should match the task at hand. Teachers are not your parents and are not obligated to accompany and take care of you. Visiting and seeking advice has 3 requirements. 1, pay respect is necessary, not just at your own convenience. Paying time is necessary. Don't just come along for the ride. And payment is necessary in cash. Time is money, meaning if it is not honest, please do not disrupt.
Love it.
So you got to pay respect, pay time of training, and pay the cash.
And pay money.
And buy the dinners, you know what I mean? Like, it's good advice. When I was doing my book, I was hoping to interview him for the book. And so I went to LA, which was a long journey, and I finally got down there. And then his student Matt told me where the class was. So like I was getting my act together, but I had all these other commitments I had to do. And then it was like, we finally finished everything, and the class was 1 hour away. And I'm like, okay, I think I can still do this. So we got in the car, got on traffic, and then I realized, oh my God, I've never been in traffic like this before. It was like LA freeway nightmare, just like
Right.
creeping along at 3 miles an hour. And I'm like, I've got an hour to get to this place, and I don't think I'm gonna make it. And so it took me forever. And I finally got there. And then class was kind of just coming to an end. I came in the door, and how disrespectful is it to charge into a middle of a class or like the end of a class, Like, oh shit. But I did it anyways. I'm like, this is my one chance. I got to do this. So I ran in. And so Sudong Chen was demonstrating, and he's, working with a guy twice his size, like literally. It's this huge, tall dude. And I saw him just give the most casual light shin kick to the guy's leg, and the guy just collapsed into a heap with just the lightest kick that you've ever seen, just hardly any effort whatsoever. And he's a small dude, just like gave him a little, but there's a little whip to it, just bank, and the guy just collapsed. I was like, oh man, this looks like the real
Nice.
deal. So he demonstrated a little more, and I got to see him in action. I was like, this dude has way more everything, power, speed,
Right.
tactic than you would think looking at someone of the smaller size. And just like he was hitting so hard. Unfortunately, I didn't get to go up, but that's my own fault for only giving myself an hour to get there, which I underestimated LA traffic, which cost me, and unfortunately I
Right.
wasn't able to come back. But on the
Vicious.
way out,
It's vicious.
I don't know how, but Matt got him to agree to do an interview with me, even though I barely even showed
Right.
up. And I just pointed to the nearest restaurant. I'm like, hey, let's go in there. So we went in there, um, and Master Su was just talking and talking and telling stories, and um, it was being translated for me, and we must have talked for like an hour and a half in there, and he was just telling. I can't remember much of what he said. I wish I had taken better notes because
Oh
this was
no.
this was literally 20 years ago, but it was just tales of adventure and just a brawl on the bus. I remember it was one of them. And I think one of them, he wrapped a leather jacket around his arm to protect himself from the knife stabs,
All right.
which was what he was talking about, protecting yourself from weapons. And he had a
Yeah,
lot of
yeah.
good advice about that.
That's a
He
good
would
one.
always wear a leather jacket and
Right,
use that to protect, so your forward arm has the leather
right. You
jacket
always
on it, can
gotta,
deflect it at least somewhat.
yeah.
But anyways, it was action packed, man, and tons of advice. And the end of the story was that, and when I went home to transcribe the interview, the dishwashers in the back it was sort of the end of lunch, and they were just steam cooking the dishes and clattering them and stacking them, that the entire interview was 100% obscured. And you
No, no.
couldn't hear anything of what was being said. And
That
the
sucks.
whole interview was just wiped off the map. And that was one of my great regrets
Wah,
from
wah, wah.
the book. And
That
I'd had so
sucks.
much good luck. I had, tons of different teachers agreed to talk with
Can't
me,
win them
and
all.
and that was the one I lost, which I regret,
That's the
unfortunately,
one
to
that
this
got
day,
away,
because
huh?
it was some good stuff. But Master Su's still out there. Sometimes he does teach in the U.S. I don't know where he's at these days. I think he's back in Japan last I heard, but it's hard to say. Sometimes he's in Taiwan, sometimes he's in the States.
He's getting up there too,
And
right?
he's, he's up there definitely in the 70s.
70
And
something like that.
but I can only imagine, if you're able to find him and you love martial arts, you'll get all you ask for if you go
Yeah.
visit him.
All right.
All right. Well, great
Yeah.
talking to you about Sudong Chen,
Yeah, that's
and
a good one.
see you next week.
Okay. Hey, folks, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the episode there. Again, if you want to listen to the Patreon episode and hear extended episodes and bonus episodes and all the other stuff we have on there, you can go ahead over to the Patreon. It's $5 a month for the basic membership, $10 for the premium. And like I said, this week we're going to be continuing our investigation into Zhang Feng with an article from Taiwan Wulin 2002 by Lotus Shoop. So check it out. Thanks for listening. Take care of yourselves and be well.